Reflecting on my past, I never could have imagined the surprising directions my life would take. When I was younger, I felt certain about everything, brimming with confidence and hope. I was just beginning, full of aspirations, and the thought of setbacks hardly crossed my mind. But my dreams were simple but heartfelt: a loving family, a successful career, and perhaps a bit of adventure along the way. I wasn't one to seek attention, always modest, but I gave my all in everything I did. Even as life's difficulties started surfacing, I held firm in my belief that dedication and hard work could conquer any challenge. Meeting Jennifer felt like the start of a movie I didn't know I was in. She entered my life quietly, without fanfare, but her impact was profound. From then on, everything seemed to center on building a future together. Our relationship was built on what I thought was mutual respect, trust, and a love that could face any test. I threw myself into my career, focused on giving our family the best life possible. But as the years went by, subtle changes started eroding the foundation we'd built, and the life I'd carefully constructed began to unravel in ways I never saw coming. I was at my desk, staring at the computer, when Jennifer came in. It had become routine, her returning late from work with little explanation. It was almost 10 p.m. The kids had already eaten, done their homework, and gone to bed. They no longer asked why she wasn't home, and that troubled me deeply. The kids had adjusted to her late arrivals, and honestly, so had I. Reviewing our finances, I could no longer ignore the situation. Over the past 2 years, our financial health had taken a sharp downturn. Our income had dropped considerably, yet Jennifer carried on spending as if nothing had changed. After paying the last round of bills, I calculated that we could barely manage for another couple of months. I didn't know how long she had been standing there, watching me. Lately, I'd been losing myself in my thoughts more often, sometimes losing track of time. Finally, with her arms crossed and an all-too-familiar look of disdain, she spoke. "Michael, I want a divorce." I'm not sure what I felt at that moment. My mind was weighed down by doubt and self-blame, leaving me almost numb to new emotions. I had to suppress a laugh. It wasn't funny, but something about it nearly made me smile. My wife of 17 years was telling me it was over, that everything we'd built would soon be destroyed. I hadn't felt this much emotion in a long time, and strangely, it almost made me smile. I looked at her briefly, savoring one last memory of our happier days, before facing reality again. "Fine," I said. I'd always been better at programming than managing, but programmers get promoted to project manager, then department head, and eventually to senior management. That's how I ended up as a senior product development manager, though it was just a fancy title for a salesperson. I was the most qualified for the position, having practically created our flagship product line myself. I'd nurtured it from its early stages through 6 upgrades. No one knew it better than I did. When clients had questions, I had answers, and when employees faced issues, I knew how to help. With a fresh haircut and a sharp suit, I looked the part. The promotions, pay raise, and benefits didn't hurt either. I was mostly satisfied with my job, though I missed programming immensely. My role left me no time for it, with too many meetings and calls to ever return to the code. Watching a new wave of eager employees striving to outdo each other with fresh ideas was rewarding but bittersweet. Being the boss had its perks, but I often wished my duties were different. So it wasn't shocking when I was let go from Chicago Technology Solutions. In their position, I might have done the same. My attendance at meetings had become erratic, and I'd missed more deadlines than I could count. I hadn't intended to get fired, but I hadn't exactly fought to keep my job either. After CTS, I fell into a deep depression, taking me nearly 3 months to pull myself out and try to move forward, though my efforts didn't immediately lead to success. Another month passed before I found a way through the chaos, something I could live with. I might have lost my sanity if it weren't for the kids. Their steady routine helped ground me: breakfast, school, snacks, homework, dinner, and bedtime. That rhythm became my mantra, helping me regain my balance. I poured myself into life as a stay-at-home dad, taking on all the household chores and chauffeuring duties. The kids loved having me around, and it reminded me that I had value, that I wasn't useless. If Jennifer noticed the shifts in our family's dynamics, she never mentioned it. I doubt she even saw it. I met Jennifer Riley at a fraternity party I almost didn't attend. I'd joined the frat not for the parties but for the networking opportunities after college. I figured I'd need every advantage possible. Academically, I was doing fine, but in every other way I was just ordinary average in height, weight, looks, and personality. Even my name, Michael, was the most common from 1961 to 1988, totally average. Away from a computer, I didn't stand out. I went on a few dates, but no real relationships. I was comfortable being on my own, even in my senior year, until I saw Jennifer Riley. Jennifer was almost as plain as I was, but I'd noticed that average women often have a natural beauty. She was somewhat shy, and I watched her for a while before gathering the nerve to approach her. Our first interaction was brief and quiet, but we slowly got to know each other over the next few weeks. We met for coffee, studied together in the library, and after nearly 2 months we went on our first actual date. From that point on, the most remarkable time of my life began, a blissful 15 years. Our courtship was brief, and our engagement even shorter. Right after graduation, we got married and moved into our first apartment in Chicago. We took the train together each morning and evening to our first jobs, barely getting by but content to be side by side. We shared so much family stories, dating experiences, common interests, and aligned goals. Where we differed, we complemented each other. If I struggled with something, Jennifer could handle it, and when she faltered, one of my strengths filled the gap. I managed our finances while Jennifer excelled at keeping our social and family calendar organized. We functioned as a team, and over the years our lives steadily improved. Both of us earned promotions, expanded our circle of friends, and eventually saved enough to buy our first house, allowing us to travel and enjoy life together. Our physical relationship began gradually, much like the rest of our life together. We held hands and kissed on our first date, moving to deeper intimacy once we became exclusive. Both of us had been waiting until we were engaged. Since then, our passion grew in step with our success. Jennifer left her job 8 years later when our son Jacob was born, and a little over a year afterward, we welcomed our daughter Emily. Yes, I know their names were the most popular at the time. It had become a family tradition. We purchased a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs with room for a dog, a family car, and a minivan. Life was going well. 2 kids, a pet, a home, and 2 cars. It was all pretty standard. I didn't think I could be any happier, but I was mistaken. I was promoted to manager shortly after Emily turned 1, almost like a reward for years of steady hard work in the middle class. The new salary wasn't extravagant, but we couldn't complain. I had flexible hours and mostly worked from home, only needing to go to the office for meetings. They say money can't buy happiness, and I agree, but it can buy better clothes, improved grooming, quality healthcare, a home in a nice neighborhood, and a boost in confidence. I went from being average to slightly above average, and my wife, whom I'd always thought was beautiful, transformed into something undeniably attractive. Our bedroom life, which I'd always considered good, reached new heights. We traveled more and spent additional time with the kids while also saving steadily for retirement. When Emily started elementary school, Jennifer decided she wanted to work part-time. She quickly found a position she was enthusiastic about at a new marketing firm. She structured her work hours around the kids' school schedule, finishing in time to pick them up. It was the perfect addition to our life. We didn't need her income, so we saved it, and I calculated that by the time the kids graduated college, we'd be set for a comfortable retirement. I discovered my wife's affair by accident 3 months before our 15th anniversary. It happened around my birthday, or rather, I stumbled upon the clues 2 days before, though it took me weeks to put it all together. At first, I hadn't thought much about her wanting a larger role at work, even if it meant a few extra hours each week. I started picking up the kids more, and I didn't mind. After a few months, however, I noticed she seemed increasingly distracted. When I asked, she said she was stressed from adjusting to her job, so I took on more at home to ease her load. When our once passionate physical relationship began to fade, I asked about it. She attributed it to getting older and not needing as much as before. For a few weeks, our intimacy improved, but then it dwindled again. I hesitated to bring it up, worried it might lead to an argument. I was nearly at my breaking point when I found the gift. The weather had turned colder, and I was looking for one of my sweaters. Since I had taken over laundry duties, I occasionally misplaced things. While sorting through her closet, I spotted it tucked behind some old shoe boxes, a pink box with a white ribbon from a lingerie store. My heart raced when I saw the card addressed to my beloved. A small battle waged in my mind. Should I peek or wait? Eventually, I decided to open it. I wasn't sure I could wait until my birthday to find out what was inside. The card both thrilled and unsettled me. It read, "Please excuse the packaging. This gift came like this. You can unwrap the real present on your birthday when I wear what's in the box. Love, Jennifer. Over the next 2 days, I went all out, surprising her with flowers, giving her foot massages, and cooking her favorite meals. Her reactions, however, weren't what I expected. She seemed to tolerate my gestures rather than appreciate them. On my birthday, I made sure the kids finished their homework early. I didn't want anything to interrupt the special surprise I expected, so I was surprised when Jennifer came home late from work, and I was even more confused when she asked, "What's for dinner?" Going along with it, I suggested, "We're going out for pizza," and the kids loved it. I had arranged for the waitress to lead a birthday serenade, and just before we left, the staff sang happy birthday to me. I thought I saw a brief flicker of surprise in Jennifer's eyes, but she quickly masked it. "I'll give you your gift later, Michael," she said, smiling. The drive home was tense, and I nearly had a fender bender. The 15 minutes it took for the kids to get ready for bed felt like an eternity, but the next 15 minutes while they drifted off to sleep were torturous. Thankfully, Jennifer returned from a quick trip to the store just as the kids were asleep. When I went into the bedroom, she wasn't there. I sat on the bed, waiting. A moment later, she came out of the bathroom wearing a flannel nightgown, no makeup, and her hair in a ponytail. At that point, my patience with this game was wearing thin. "When do I get my present?" I asked, trying to hold back my frustration. She climbed into bed, pulled the covers up, and reached to turn off the light, but paused. "Oh, I almost forgot," she said, reaching into her nightstand drawer. She pulled a small, square box wrapped in leftover balloon-themed paper from Michael's last birthday and handed it to me. "Happy birthday, honey," and that was it. She rolled over, turned off the light, and went to sleep. I was too stunned to even open her gift. The next day, a wave of depression hit me hard. I replayed the events over and over in my mind, trying to pinpoint what I had done to ruin the evening. I was completely at a loss. I stayed trapped in that despair for almost 2 weeks, haunted by that damned gift. It taunted me, reminding me of my failure. I'd heard all the clichés, like the husband is always the last to know. Honestly, I had no clue. The thought of Jennifer being unfaithful seemed so impossible that I hadn't even considered it. But that was exactly where my mind went when, 13 days after my birthday, she called and said, "I'll be home late. It's Alan's 30th birthday, and the team's throwing him a party." I don't remember my response, or even walking to the bedroom closet, but I remember staring at the empty spot where her gift had been. For a moment I thought I might be having a heart attack, and a fleeting part of me wished I was just so everything would end right then. Alan Henderson was Jennifer's boss, a cocky, self-assured advertising exec a few years younger than us. I'd met him only once, but he left a bad impression, coming across as completely insincere. Emily's voice brought me back to reality. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked, watching me with worry. I blinked and forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetie. Dad just ate something that didn't sit well. I'll be out in a minute." Eventually, I left the bathroom, though I don't recall much after that. I remember grabbing a dusty bottle of scotch. Judging by my headache the next morning, I must have had several glasses. I had no idea what time Jennifer came home. When I saw her in the kitchen the next morning, feeding the kids, she acted as if nothing had happened. She went through her usual routine, but a subtle shudder as she sat down to eat was all it took to wipe out any remaining love I had for her. It was a small reaction, but it was enough. I'd love to say I confronted her right then, but I didn't. I was crushed, barely functioning. For weeks I moved through my days like a zombie, watching her go through our routines, feeling worse each day. I thought I had hit rock bottom. It took until that weekend, our 15th anniversary, to snap myself out of it and decide to take action. I probably would have continued doing nothing, letting myself sink lower. I knew it was cowardice, and if my father were alive, he'd have said the same. It wasn't until my wife announced she'd be attending a work conference that my thoughts began to clear. "She won't even be here for our anniversary," I thought bitterly. I didn't know why it bothered me so much, but it stung that she didn't even remember the date. After drowning my sorrows that night, I woke up with a renewed sense of anger. Enough is enough, I told myself. I called a lawyer and scheduled an appointment, determined to put an end to the charade. I thought I'd hit rock bottom, but I was wrong. When I walked into the lawyer's office, full of resolve, my determination quickly turned into shock. I knew divorce could be challenging, but I assumed Jennifer's infidelity would give me an advantage. Instead, my lawyer tore apart my assumptions. I had no proof of her affair, and even if I did, it wouldn't affect the division of assets, it'd still be 50/50. Since I had no evidence she was an unfit mother, the best I could hope for was joint custody. The income difference worked in her favor, meaning I'd likely pay alimony and spousal support. She'd probably get primary custody and the right to stay in the house with the kids. My wife was a cheater, and I was left feeling like a fool. I went from feeling defeated to furious. A few weeks later, Jennifer looked at me with mild concern. "You don't look well, Michael. Is something wrong?" No, darling, at least she pretended to care, and I just drifted through life, feeling like an outsider. Then I lost my job. I didn't realize it then, but losing my job was the best thing that could have happened to me. One evening I was watching the news, absorbing one sad story after another, and felt like it matched my mood perfectly. Then a segment came on about a major company on the East Coast that had gone bankrupt, leaving employees without pay and anxious about their pensions. I realized that some people had it worse than I did. An analyst on TV said the employees would probably win a lawsuit, but that it wouldn't matter since the funds were gone. I started thinking if we had nothing, there'd be nothing to split. My wife couldn't take what didn't exist. It was a reckless idea, but I was desperate. I was set to lose half anyway. Did I really care about the rest? I started with a simple plan: I'd remain unemployed and live off our savings until they were gone. It was a crazy thought, and I doubted it would work, but it was something to hold on to. 2 years is a long time, and I grew painfully bored, especially since I spent most of it alone. Jennifer had always been the heart of our social circle, and once she withdrew, I realized I had no close friends. I was an only child. Both my parents had passed away when I was young, my dad from a heart attack, my mom from cancer. I was truly alone, aside from my kids, who were the only bright spot in my life. I enrolled in an executive MBA program at a local university, an expensive endeavor costing nearly $120,000 up front. I also bought a new luxury SUV for $60,000, maxed out the kids' college funds, which was another $260,000, and spent thousands on a new wardrobe. Twice a week I withdrew cash, dropping the kids at school, stopping at the bank, and heading to the lake. I didn't gamble the money. Instead, I'd spend small amounts to create the illusion of casino trips, keeping receipts for food, parking, and drinks. Most of the cash went into a safe in our garage, a personal reserve for life after the divorce, in case things got rough. I also paid for surveillance on Jennifer and her lover, hiring someone to gather everything: photos, videos, and a daily record of her activities. I'm embarrassed by how much it cost. You might wonder if she noticed my spending. I'd say she probably did, except she likely assumed it was under control. I had to tell her about the college funds since her signature was required, and she saw the new car and clothes. She didn't question anything, maybe assuming I was still working and that we were financially stable. She even made a few significant purchases herself, but I said nothing. I often wondered who the new lingerie was really for, but I didn't ask. We were like polite roommates, with no real interest in each other. There was no point in even addressing it. Time with my kids became the most meaningful part of my life. I supported them in whatever hobbies they wanted to try, helped with their homework, played games, went to parks, rode bikes, and watched movies together. I'd taken on cooking duties, and the kids enjoyed helping. I found easy recipes and let them experiment. Jennifer was around once or twice a week, and while I didn't exclude her from family activities, I didn't go out of my way to involve her. If she wanted to join, she did so quietly. Every week I received updates on her activities. Initially I thought her only affair was with her boss, but I soon learned there were other men from the office as well. Later her clients got involved too. It hurt to see her already fallen in my eyes, and having undeniable proof didn't make it any easier. In a way it provided closure, but only a little. I soon realized Alan Henderson wasn't much of a romantic partner. He seemed more skilled at juggling multiple women. I had assumed, given her gift, that they shared something meaningful, but it turned out they were just casual flings, like her other 6 affairs. About a year into this, I realized I hadn't been intimate since starting down this path. It didn't bother me much, it was just another layer of my miserable life. Eventually I stopped tracking her affairs. It became more of a chore to sift through the reports. Despite managing classes, taking care of the kids, and my pretend gambling trips, I had a lot of free time. So I started planning my post-marriage life, anticipating the day I'd finally be free. I began a new workout regimen. While I'd always been in decent shape, I wasn't extraordinary, but I made good progress with my bench press and running. I believe physical attributes like big muscles are mostly genetic, and I wasn't gifted in that area, but I was happy with my appearance. I also began catching up on developments in my old field, knowing I'd need a job again. A year off had set me back further than I expected, so I spent hours each day updating myself on new technologies and software. I took a particular interest in my former company, CTS. They seemed stagnant, maintaining their market share without growing. In tech, standing still often means falling behind. I also threw myself into learning about divorce. Sure, I spent some time brainstorming new ways to disrupt my soon-to-be ex-wife's life, but mostly I focused on understanding the impact of divorce on kids. My children were now the biggest part of my life, and I wanted to be fully prepared to support them when the time came. There's a lot of information out there, and much of it seemed like fluff, but some insights were helpful. About 8 months into this new life, I began to worry. My wife started coming home on time, initiating conversations, and asking about my day. I kept my responses short, but it didn't seem to deter her. She even started dressing provocatively for bed, as if trying to rekindle some closeness between us. A few weeks later, it escalated. After over a year of ignoring our marriage, she suddenly began complaining about a lack of communication, wanting to work on things. I shut down entirely, giving her silence in response. Her attempts to reconcile continued until her birthday. For her birthday, I left her gift on the dining table. She must have recognized the wrapping. It was the same as her last gift to me. The present itself shouldn't have been surprising either. It had taken me 6 months to open her last birthday gift to me, a cheap digital watch from a convenience store priced at $9.95. Seeing it had filled me with rage, so when I later found a matching women's watch, I knew what to do. I bought it and waited 18 months to give it to her. I wish I could have seen her reaction, but we weren't there when she opened it the kids, and I had a late movie night and didn't get home until well after noon the next day. She was already gone by the time we woke up. Just like that, things went back to how they'd been. Jennifer started staying late at work again, and we barely exchanged words at home. Finally, the moment I'd been waiting for arrived. Michael, I want a divorce. I hoped she'd handle it quickly, but nearly a week passed before her demands came in. They were almost laughable: spousal and child support, an uneven asset split in her favor, and claims of emotional and mental cruelty. I gave her until Monday, then took the kids camping, not wanting them around for what was coming. We returned 6 days later, refreshed and well-rested. Jennifer was home, sitting alone in the living room, visibly shaken. Looking back, I'm not sure what surprised me most. I had filed for divorce on the grounds of infidelity, requesting the house, our last substantial asset, and full custody of the kids. Since I'd been unemployed and the primary caregiver for 2 years, I also requested spousal and child support. I filed alienation of affection claims against her 7 partners, even though I knew the chances of winning were slim. Illinois law allowed it, so I went for it. Additionally, I filed civil suits against her employer and 3 client companies, arguing they had exploited her. I didn't expect to win, but the potential bad press might strengthen my position. Finally, I sent DVDs containing Jennifer's greatest hits to her parents and closest friends, letting her know I wasn't afraid to use what I had. She must have realized the extent of my evidence. All of this was laid out in my counterclaim, but I wanted to make sure she understood my resolve. The kids grabbed a snack and went straight to their rooms, barely acknowledging their mother. She made no effort to interact with them. I fetched a beer from the fridge and took a seat across from her in the living room. She wouldn't meet my gaze for a long time, so I simply enjoyed my drink. Besides looking physically unwell, it was clear she'd been crying, perhaps from emotional pain as well as humiliation. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You're going to ruin me." I waited until she looked at me before responding. I really hoped so. I had imagined this moment would feel more intense, especially as a single tear rolled down her cheek, but I felt nothing. "Do you hate me that much?" she asked. "Oh no, Jennifer, I don't hate you. Hate requires energy, and I don't waste any on you. All my focus is on taking care of myself and my children." "I'm still your wife," she insisted. "Stop," I shook my head. "I won't let someone like you tarnish the memory of my wife. My wife was loving, caring, a true partner, and a wonderful mother. That woman is gone. You're just the person who took her place. Don't pretend to mean anything to me." It was a long while before she spoke again. "What am I supposed to do now?" "Are you actually asking or just being rhetorical?" I didn't wait for an answer. "You have a few options. You could go far away and try to start over. Honestly, that's what I'd suggest. I won't allow you to have any significant role in our children's lives, so you don't need to worry about that when you decide. Or you could stay around, hoping I'll keep quiet. But who knows what people will hear about you or what kind of job you could get with your reputation. Maybe you'll find a man who doesn't mind what you become, but what kind of man would that be? Or you could end it all. I'd prefer you didn't. It would deprive me of watching you face the consequences of your choices. But I wasn't a factor in your decisions when you started seeing your boss." I had rehearsed this speech for months, picturing her spirit breaking with each word. I thought I'd feel satisfaction, but instead I just felt empty. Life after the divorce was consumed by legal battles. I ended up doing far better than I anticipated, receiving over $1 million in settlements from 3 companies whose employees had been involved with my wife. Even my lawyer hadn't expected much, but we figured these companies just wanted to avoid the negative press, especially after witnessing what we had done to my ex-wife's employer. We took down that company with a series of discovery motions, depositions, and media leaks. I went a step further, emailing the CEOs of their remaining clients about my wife, her boss, and their affairs. Over time, their revenue shrank, employees left to avoid the association, and eventually they went bankrupt. Alan Henderson was fired and left town in disgrace. The $200,000 settlement I got from that was less than the others, but it felt satisfying. I received nothing from the alienation of affection claims, as expected, though 4 of the involved men's wives eventually filed for divorce. Not everyone involved got a happy ending. In pursuing all of this, I also ended up hurting myself. For a while, I couldn't go anywhere without hearing whispers or seeing people snicker. Oddly, I didn't mind already feeling like a failure. Their mockery had little effect on me. My children were my top priority, and although they were down for a while, they eventually recovered. One of my biggest wins was returning to CTS as Vice President of Design and Development. Going back to programming helped me escape my personal struggles, and over 2 tough years, I developed an add-on for CTS's main software, making it compatible with 2 competitor platforms. I launched a company to market my software, and within a year I received acquisition offers from all 3 major competitors. CTS ultimately purchased my company and software for $1 million, plus a generous compensation package. Although I'd thought about retiring, I realized my lack of a social life would probably turn me into a recluse without a daily purpose. My new income allowed me to hire a kind older woman as a part-time housekeeper and nanny for the kids. A year later, Mrs. Marlene Jensen moved in full-time, staying in the apartment above our new garage. She became like a grandmother to my kids, warm and caring but firm when needed. What I appreciated most was her experience and advice, which she shared with my children. I loved my kids deeply and tried to be a dedicated father, but I was also scarred, bitter, and tough. Mrs. Jensen became my anchor whenever I had tough decisions to make, guiding me with patience and kindness. She stayed with us for 15 years, until the kids went to college, then retired. I offered her free room and board as a sort of pension. She gently encouraged me to open up and share my life with someone new, but in the end she passed away knowing I would likely remain alone. I never opened up to anyone else. My friendships were shallow and left me feeling empty, and I never dated except for the occasional group dinner with acquaintances. I gained a reputation for being a cold, inflexible person, and most people kept their distance, which I couldn't blame them, for I had brought it upon myself. My physical needs were simple to manage given my increasing wealth. I kept a rotating roster of call girls, paying well for their time. Generally, it was just a matter of brief companionship, followed by sending them on their way. One of them, Candy real name Mary Beth, stood out to me. She was warm, passionate, and I think I meant more to her than just a client. But I couldn't let anyone in close enough to bear my burdens, so when she showed signs of attachment, I let her go. If you're curious about Jennifer, her life wasn't easy. She tried to reconnect for nearly a year. I don't know what she wanted, reconciliation or a relationship with the kids. I warned her, but she ignored it. She stayed in Chicago, and I made sure her past haunted her at every turn. When she applied for jobs, her record always seemed to follow her. If she started dating someone new, I made sure her suitors received reminders detailing exactly who they were getting involved with. Whether they stayed or left after learning the truth wasn't my concern, but I wasn't going to let her rewrite history while I had to live with it. So would she? Jennifer continued her endless calls and emails, filling up my inbox with messages I never replied to. Early on, I took a dark satisfaction in her misery. Looking back, maybe I should have sought help. It might have salvaged my sanity and given me a chance to rebuild my life, but I didn't, and as time went by it felt too late to change. I could have changed my phone number or had someone sort through her messages for me, but I didn't. I could have blocked her emails to avoid accidentally seeing her apologies, but they meant nothing. Unsurprisingly, things spiraled. She claimed she'd always loved me and that she'd suffered enough, so I sent her a response in the form of a gift and a short note. I bought the most revealing lingerie I could find at her favorite store, wrapped it in pink with a white ribbon, and added a handwritten note. I imagine she caught the irony when she opened the card addressed to the witch. One of her boyfriends even tried to confront me, showing up at my door after drinking and shoving me the second I opened it. That was his mistake. I'm no martial artist, nor did I have any combat experience, but I was an average man with a lot of pent-up rage. He ended up on the receiving end. I came away with minor burns and a cracked rib he was lucky to survive. He pled guilty to assault and trespassing, receiving probation. His years of reconstructive surgery and rehab probably left a deeper impact. After that, Jennifer finally stopped trying to contact me. I eventually lost track of her after she landed a full-time job cleaning rooms at a roadside motel in rural Virginia, 700 miles away. The only time I saw her again was 16 years later, at our daughter's wedding. I knew the kids had reconnected with Jennifer after they finished college, and I never tried to stop them. The years hadn't been kind to her. She'd gained at least 40 pounds, had deep lines around her mouth, and bore signs of smoking a new habit. She looked worn and aged, but I could still see a glimpse of the woman I had once loved. I felt nothing for her, but I saw her. She sat quietly at the back of the bridal section, keeping her interactions with our daughter brief and polite, not approaching me once. We stayed on opposite sides of the room, never coming within 30 feet of each other. When I saw her later, standing on the curb waiting for a taxi, I noticed a modest gold ring with a tiny diamond on her finger. A faint smile crept over my face, the first in a long time. Maybe she'd made a better choice this time. I walked over, studying the ring for a moment before meeting her gaze. With sadness in her eyes, she said quietly, "For the record, you ruined my life." First, I looked from her hand back to her face. "I'm glad you found someone. I hope he brings you happiness with that." I turned and walked to my car, where my driver was waiting. "Good evening, Mr. Smith. I trust you had a pleasant evening. Shall we head to the club?" Jonathan asked. "It went as well as expected, Jonathan." "No, just take me straight home tonight. I'd prefer to be alone." "Of course, sir." As we drove away, I tried not to look back, but I glimpsed her waving goodbye in the rearview mirror. Michael Smith wasn't the typical handsome or striking figure, but he was gentle, somewhat appealing, and incredibly smart. We met on one of my worst college nights, left stranded at a frat party by my sorority sisters, who had disappeared to hook up with random guys. After 2 hours of dodging drunk strangers, Michael walked over, introduced himself quietly, and held my gaze. Before leaving, he handed me his number and mentioned he'd love to grab coffee sometime. That brief encounter became the highlight of my semester. A week later, I messaged him, and we met for coffee. Talking to him felt easy. He knew so much about everything. He was studying computer science, yet clearly well-rounded enough for any field. He asked me about my studies, especially ancient philosophy, a subject I struggled with as a business and advertising major. He suggested we study together, and that evening in the library, he patiently helped me prepare for my philosophy exam, adjusting his explanations whenever I didn't understand, never making me feel inadequate. When I passed, he sounded truly happy for me, although he joked that it was just a selfish excuse to spend more time with me. Over the next weeks, I found myself drawn to Michael's focus on his studies and his disinterest in partying. We didn't go on official dates, but he'd call me daily, leave thoughtful notes, and ask about my family, my dreams, and my interests. He was also open about himself when I asked. One day I asked him about his biggest fear. After a moment's pause, he admitted he was afraid he wouldn't be a good father. An only child who had lost both parents in high school and grown up with a distant uncle, he hadn't known a close-knit family. He wanted to marry and have kids, but worried he wouldn't know how to be a good dad. Looking up at me, he waited for my response, and I said, "Not too much, Michael, just enough." A month later, he asked if I was free on Saturday. When I said yes, he told me he'd pick me up but kept the plan a surprise, leaving me in suspense. My sorority sisters exchanged knowing smiles. When Michael finally arrived, he was dressed in burgundy and sky blue, along with 3 of his fraternity brothers who carried a large fridge and trays of hot food. He handed me a West Ham shirt, a DVD, and grinned, asking to see the main room. Inside, my sorority sisters and his friends, all dressed in West Ham colors, began chanting. I was speechless. I'd once mentioned missing a family trip to England to see my cousin play for West Ham United because of exams, and Michael had remembered. He'd arranged for a recorded West Ham game, learned team chants, and even brought English ale and fish and chips. When my cousin scored, he quieted the room so I could watch. It may have been delayed, but it felt like an experience even my family didn't get to have. After the game, he and his friends cleaned up and left, leaving me to endure my friends teasing about the look in my eyes. It was worth it. In the weeks that followed, we kept meeting for coffee and trading notes. One day he nervously asked if I'd like to have dinner with him that Friday officially as a date. I said yes, and he broke into the biggest smile I'd ever seen. From that point, everything felt like a whirlwind of joy. I excelled in my studies and felt more confident than ever. Michael always made me feel special, though he humbly saw himself as lucky to be with me. He was intelligent, well-mannered, well-dressed, and modest, never showing off his knowledge or popularity. At graduation, my sorority held its annual tradition where each boyfriend received reviews. Michael received only positive feedback, a first in the event's 29-year history. I was immensely proud but couldn't tell him due to the tradition's secrecy. A few days later, Michael drove me home to Chicago. He'd found a job there. During the drive, we held hands, chatted, and stopped for breakfast. When we arrived, he charmed my parents and even invited my dad out for a beer. Watching them leave, my mom turned to me with teary eyes, saying, "Jennifer, this one's a keeper." I smiled. "Trust me, Mom. I know." When Michael and my dad returned, they were all smiles. Michael told me he'd come back for dinner and quickly left to check into his hotel. That's when he shared that he'd asked my father's permission to marry me. That evening was unforgettable. After a romantic Italian dinner, Michael proposed to me on the Willis Tower skydeck, overlooking the dazzling Chicago skyline. It felt like the city mirrored my happiness. Being a virgin in college had sometimes felt embarrassing, as if I were the last one in my sorority, but that night it became a meaningful gift. Michael, equally inexperienced, was gentle, loving, and patient, making it a beautiful first experience. When I asked how he was so considerate, he simply whispered, "I read a lot of books." Our life felt almost perfect. Michael quickly landed a great job and climbed the ranks, and our first decade of marriage was filled with joy and growth. Our children brought even more fulfillment, though those years aren't central to this story of what went wrong. Looking back, I see that I let insecurities take root because I never fully shared them with Michael. He had always been open with me, even about his own fears, and treated me as an equal in every decision, despite his higher income and financial expertise. Mostly I felt valued, but sometimes I felt like I wasn't contributing as much. I kept those feelings to myself, but I realize now that he would have helped me if I'd spoken up. He loved me deeply and would have supported me. Over time, those insecurities grew, and by the time our kids began school, I felt the need for something that was just my own. I didn't want a lover. I loved my husband and was fulfilled in our relationship, even if our intimacy had grown a bit predictable. I knew Michael would have been open to trying new things, but I hesitated, fearing it might disturb the good thing we had. Instead, I wanted a real sense of independence, so I decided to get a job. I braced myself to defend this choice to Michael, but he simply said, "That sounds great, Jennifer." Whatever makes you happy. With his encouragement, I threw myself into my new role, feeling empowered and self-sufficient. Reflecting back, my initial excitement over my newfound independence now seems embarrassingly naive, but at the time it was exhilarating. My workplace was filled with young, bold energy and a casual attitude. Many colleagues had flings without commitment. For them, intimacy wasn't about attachment, but rather about feeling empowered. There was no hiding it. and nobody seemed to judge. My boss, Alan Henderson, was infamous in the office for his frequent hookups, and people often joked about his latest achievements. Although he wasn't my type and I brushed him off at first, his presence made me wonder if Michael and I were missing something in our own relationship. My friends didn't openly talk about intimacy like I heard at work, so the new environment was jarring. After our first office holiday party, where I introduced Alan to Michael, everything shifted. I sensed tension between them, though they remained polite. After that, I avoided bringing up work with Michael and didn't mention Alan again. Meanwhile, Alan's interest in me seemed to grow. He'd publicly praise my work, invite me out to lunch to discuss projects, and drop subtle compliments on my appearance, calling me striking or alluring. Over the months, I allowed myself to be drawn in by his attention. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I eventually found myself half-dressed with Alan on his desk after hours. In that moment, I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years. Later, I realized the depth of my betrayal. Michael had always been patient, gentle, and open, even subtly trying to rekindle excitement in our relationship efforts I had ignored. Alan's true colors became clear when I ended things. He didn't take it well. He mocked me and threw me out of his office. Later, I found a package on my desk containing compromising photos and a note instructing me to meet him at 5:30. Those photos kept me trapped, enduring situations I despised for another 18 months. Eventually, I found the strength to say, "I'm done. Show the photos if you want." Alan's mocking laughter marked the end, and I walked away feeling both free and foolish. When I finally woke up from this nightmare, I was stunned by the state of our home. Michael and the kids seemed to be getting along just fine without me. Deep down, I'd thought they'd struggle without my attention, but the opposite was true. I felt like I wasn't needed at all. Michael was clearly thriving: new car, new clothes, and exuding confidence. Seeing how long I had neglected them filled me with guilt. I resolved to rededicate myself to my family and do whatever I could to make up for my mistakes. But a chasm had opened between Michael and me. I often wondered when it had started growing. Michael never yelled or argued, but he treated me like an unwelcome guest. I decided to make an effort. I tried seducing him with new lingerie and flirtatious hints, but nothing worked. He hardly touched me. Months later, I assessed our marriage: no connection, no intimacy, and barely any conversation. I couldn't go on like that, so I suggested marriage counseling. That's when Michael stopped speaking to me entirely. His silence stretched into weeks, and it pushed me to my breaking point. As my birthday approached, I allowed myself a glimmer of hope. Surely he wouldn't ignore me on my birthday. But I was wrong. I came home expecting a celebration and found only an empty house. On the dining table there was a small, wrapped box. I knew exactly what it was before I even opened it. Years before, in a panic, I'd forgotten Michael's birthday and grabbed a cheap watch from a convenience store, planning to replace it later, a promise I never kept. My thoughtlessness had been accidental. His gift, however, was intentional. By the time I went to bed, I was livid. Keeping the kids from me on my birthday felt cruel, and the gift was beyond the line. I should have realized something was seriously wrong. The message in that gift should have been a wake-up call. Michael was not a spiteful person. He'd always been the most kind-hearted man I'd ever known. If I hadn't let my anger cloud my judgment, I might have saved our marriage. If I had confessed everything and asked for forgiveness, perhaps we could have salvaged something. But at that moment, I stopped thinking about repair and started considering divorce. With sadness but determination, I spent weeks planning with my lawyer. I told her about Michael's coldness and even cruelty, his refusal to attend counseling and his silence. She pursued my claims, assuring me I'd be fairly compensated. Reviewing the terms felt like I was securing justice for myself, a chance to move forward. All that remained was to break the news. I stood quietly in his office doorway, looking at the man who had once been my partner and soulmate. He looked the same, but he wasn't the same person anymore. Finally, I'd had enough. "Michael, I want a divorce." A long silence followed, but he showed no reaction. It almost looked like he was smiling, perhaps in shock. He had to be stunned, because his response was so unexpected. No yelling, no questions. "Fine," he said. And that was it. The following Friday, he was served with the divorce papers. That weekend, Michael seemed in surprisingly high spirits, but if he was trying to make amends, it was too late for me. I wasn't interested in reconciliation. He even saw me off at the door on Monday morning as I left for work. Too little, too little, too late, I thought. The moment I stepped into the office, an uneasy feeling washed over me. I couldn't pinpoint why, but as I entered the conference room I saw my boss, the company president, and our corporate lawyer in a heated argument, papers flying between them. The commotion had me so distracted that I didn't notice the man at my desk until he spoke, startling me. Jennifer Smith. I blinked in surprise. Yes. He extended a stack of papers toward me. "You've been served." He handed me a thick envelope, snapped a quick photo, and walked away before I could sit down, let alone open the documents. As soon as he left, an HR manager and a security guard appeared. "Mrs. Smith, you're being suspended pending an investigation into allegations of inappropriate conduct in the workplace. Please gather your personal items and leave the premises," she said. Packing up with everyone watching felt humiliating, but being escorted out was even worse. I had no idea what was happening. I was barely out of the parking lot when my phone rang. It was my lawyer. She didn't even let me say hello before launching into a tirade, furious at me for hiding critical information and making her look like a fool. Those were the only words that made sense as I drove home in silence. When I arrived, the house was empty, and it wasn't until I had calmed down enough to remember the envelope that I realized the nightmare I had triggered. Michael's counterpetition was devastating. Nearly all of my affairs were documented, and our savings were gone, nearly depleted by him. But it was the word infidelity that struck me hardest. I thought it couldn't get worse, but I was wrong. Desperate for support, I called my parents. My father called me an idiot and hung up. He didn't need to explain, I already knew. Those next 7 days were some of the loneliest of my life, although later I would look back on them as oddly peaceful. I found a note from Michael later that said he'd taken the kids camping and would be back on Sunday. My oldest friend, Rebecca, called me around 7 p.m. that first night. She told me Michael had sent her a DVD, warning that I wouldn't want to know what was on it. Over the next few days, my lawyer spelled out just how hopeless my situation had become. I'd lost my job for misconduct, and Michael had filed lawsuits against my company, several clients, and all of my affair partners. I stood to lose custody of my kids and everything else. By that point, I was willing to do anything to get Michael to call off the legal assault. I tried to brace myself for his return, but when he finally came home with the kids, I couldn't hold back my tears. The kids walked past me as if I were invisible, and Michael followed them with a cold, indifferent look, holding a beer. Barely able to speak, I whispered. "You're going to ruin me," his reply, laced with pure venom. Cut deep. God, I hope so. I wasn't really talking to him, just saying what was on my mind, but he responded with a tirade that lasted for minutes, each word tearing into me further. When he finished, he simply walked away. I didn't give up right away. I kept trying to reconnect, but Michael wouldn't even look at me. I worried about how he and the kids were managing without any money, but they seemed to be doing fine. Sometimes I'd watch from afar as he dropped them off or picked them up from school. I couldn't find work, so I collected unemployment benefits, and my parents refused to speak to me. I drifted from one man's home to another, usually staying with divorced men, but never staying long. One day I'd be welcome, the next, they'd ask me to leave. Following my lawyer's advice, I began seeing a therapist who thought that showing remorse and getting help might improve my case. I didn't hold out much hope, but I worked through many issues, some of which I've shared here. The best advice she gave me came near the end of our sessions. She told me to run far, far away, knowing that Michael was fully aware of my betrayal made the pain feel sharper. I broke down crying. At the time, I was staying with Robert, a friend of a friend, a decent guy who seemed interested in something more. He'd been drinking when he came in to check on me and saw the package. Furious, he stormed out before I could stop him. I grew concerned when Robert hadn't returned for hours. I should have been more alarmed. At the hospital, the nurses wouldn't share much, but I pieced together what had happened. Apparently, Robert confronted Michael, and Michael nearly beat him unconscious. Robert's face was disfigured. He had a concussion, internal injuries, and a shattered left leg. I was horrified that my problems were harming those around me. At my next therapy session, I shared the story, and my therapist started asking more questions about Michael. I told her everything I knew about him being an only child, orphaned early, completely devoted to me and the kids, and I mentioned what he'd done to Robert. By the end, she looked visibly shaken. "You need to leave, and don't look back," she said. "Don't contact him, don't let him know where you are. There's no hope for reconciliation. If you push him, he might eliminate you. You've broken someone fragile, someone who has known disappointment all his life. He will never forgive or forget. Just go." So, I ran. I left memories of what had once been a perfect life and moved to a rundown college town in Virginia, where I took on a miserable job. Years later, I met a man who could tolerate my past. The best I can say is that he didn't smell bad or hit me. There was no love, only friendship, but it felt like part of my punishment. As my children grew older, they reached out occasionally, mostly to check in, let me know they were alive, and acknowledge that they knew I was too. But they never wanted to meet or invite me into their lives. Meanwhile, Michael seemed to flourish after I was gone. I kept up with his success as best I could. He became a software superstar, amassing a vast fortune. His personal life was a mystery, though. I only saw him one more time at our daughter's wedding. The invitation had been a shock. When he arrived, he looked amazing, just like the man I'd once loved and ultimately betrayed. A wave of nerves washed over me as he approached, clearly prepared with one final cutting remark. "For the record," I said, "you ruined my life." He glanced down at the modest wedding ring on my finger, and for a moment I regretted wearing it. "I'm glad you found someone," he replied. "I hope he makes you happy with that." He turned and walked away.